everybody get a handout?
I think so.
Everybody has a handout?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
¿Tú lo tienes?
You have the clickers? You have the little clicker? Okay.
Okay, so vent.
She again. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. And let's start with a word of prayer. Our kind and gracious and loving Heavenly Father, we are thankful today to be at the Cornerstone Church. Heavenly Father, we pray that the information that we have will be a blessing to this church that they can take and share with their communities. We thank you so much for hearing and answering our prayer. We ask all this in the blessed and the loving name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
So this afternoon, we're going to be doing common disease. This is a different strategy for me in a typical, by the way, this church all sits on this side.
I don't know why.
No.
I was just curious. Anybody know the answer why?
We all have a hearing problem on the left side, so we have to stay with the right ear, right chest.
Yeah, but I see both guys and ladies over here. I know the guys have hearing problems, but
That's all of us, right?
The ball is going to see.
yeah. Yeah, this is an older building. You don't know. I wouldn't know one put too much weight in one spot, right? Well, but typically when doing the afternoon class, I really like to put a component that is where it's very practical. In other words, we do hands-on. We're not doing that here today. I kind of wish we were, but that's okay. We're going to go through this. The reason I like the practical is because I know you need some theory in here, but the thing is that we need to be able to take the information that we have and figure out how we can really put it on the ground. And what I think is that even as a church, if you look at from like an evangelistic type of series or whatever, we have a lot of information, but people really struggle with going from point A to point B. How do I really make this work? I mean, it's okay to hear it like, well, that sounds good and all this kind of thing, but how do we really make things practical? So I'm going to do what I can to try to make this class a little bit more practical for you guys today, and I hope we'll be friends when we're done, right? So who knows? I don't know what I'm going to say yet, so things may just come out, and we'll see. Hopefully we'll have a good time. If somebody you see comes in and needs a handout, if you don't care, somebody can get them a handout, and we'll go from there. So when we're talking about common disease, we're talking about the big three. We're talking about hypertension, heart disease, and diabetes. Now, what you need to know about these guys is that they affect millions and millions and millions of lives every year. And these diseases are like they're almost like commonplace to us now. You know what I'm saying? It's like people expect this to happen, right? We're going to talk about that a little bit more too. One of the things that I would like to share though on this would be, you remember I talked about my mom in this morning in a testimony. So not to re-go over that testimony, well, another thing that I found that was very interesting is that my mom, guess what? She was diabetic, but she had these other issues as well. She also was struggling with obesity, hypertension, heart disease, because she ended up dying from a heart attack. When she was going through this struggle that she had, one of the things that I always was concerned about and was trying to figure out was, she has this, okay, like for example, diabetes. I'm like, we got this, we got to get this under control. But then you got heart disease, that's something different, right? Well, one of the things that I learned in the key and is that these things kind of all go hand in hand. Because again, they are all lifestyle related. If I'd have known then what I know now, things would have been a lot less complicated in trying to help my mom. Because I was sitting here trying to think, well, you need to treat this way and treat that way. But in actuality, all lifestyle disease can be treated the same. So you're going to see some reoccurring themes obviously through here because we're talking about natural health and how to help people with that. So having said that, let's dive into this. By the way, just thinking about this before we get started, can anyone tell me here where was the very first health test done? Biblically.
In
Can
the
you tell
Garden of
me?
Eden,
Biblically?
in the garden.
Well, a health test. That was a health test too, but I guess more like on researched or studied
Oh.
thing. That would be from the book of Daniel, right?
Mhm.
Daniel chapter 1. And what I find interesting here, now since we're such a small group, to kind of maybe put this together, give you some things to think about. Daniel 1 was a health test. They had this test that they had to pass. Now, they passed it, and they were blessed by it. You know, the Bible tells us that they were 10 times stronger, that they were 10 times smarter, even better looking. You know, so for me and you, Sammy, you know, that could be important, right? We need these things. Now, but that's interesting to me, just anecdotally, have you ever noticed that people who are whole food plant-based tend to, as they get older, actually look a little bit better? I don't know if you've observed or not, but for me, it's like their skin tone is
Nice
sharper.
color.
Yeah, they don't have wrinkles. I mean, it's really amazing. So just kind of a side note there. But there are these benefits that we talked about, you know, kind of like rewards, you know, for Sabbath school, that you can get from practicing these laws of health. So, by the way, what was Daniel 1 really setting them up for? Anybody? Daniel 1 was actually setting them up for Daniel chapter 3. You see, there was a test of health, and then we find that there was a test of worship. So I find that interesting today that we're struggling with this situation of COVID. It kind of come in as a worldwide pandemic, right? And you know, there were some struggles there from people. Now the thing is that you know God is infinitely merciful, and yet He wants and desires us to be good. So the thing is that when we are working with the health message, one of the things I think of is that it actually helps us fall into our spiritual existence. Now, having said that, we've talked about this several times today. I believe solely that salvation only comes through Jesus Christ. Now, having said that, it's interesting to me. We were in Alaska in March, and a lady comes up to Karen and I, and she says, I've been told that I won't be translated because I eat meat. This is what the lady had been told. Maybe by missionaries before or something. I don't know. She didn't give us her background story. She just wanted to know if this was going to cause her a problem for her salvation. And, you know, for me, it was very interesting. We decided, Karen and I, to, instead of answering the lady, say, let us get back to you. Let us do some research on this and let's look at this. And I found this very interesting because there are some quotes from Spirit Prophecy that says that many who eat flesh in the last days won't be translated. But the key word is many. It doesn't say all. And I think sometimes we try to mold people into saying, and we want to tell them, listen, we want to make this a salvational issue. What we discovered in our studies was guess what? Spirit Prophecy also says in the last days, where there is not an abundance of guess what? Fruits and vegetables, that people may need to consume flesh. You see, the health message is about health. That's what it's about. It's not a salvational component. And so I want people to understand that. But guess what? When you practice the health message, you will see that the same things like with Daniel now, that we will actually have hopefully a better quality, sharper minds, that we can share with people. Okay. Now I'm going to have to be like Karen and figure out how to do this too. Now, so when we went over this definition this morning, I want to just briefly go over it again. But I want maybe you guys to tell me what you got out of this morning. Remember we talked about the definition of a chronic disease and that there were lifestyle choices that cause this problem. Again, I want to iterate that this is where we find that there's a fundamental difference in where you're dealing with your lifestyle and how it directly affects you in your health. Okay? Can you out here give me an example or a reason why this is important? If we're working with people, when we're sharing a message of hope and health, how should we approach people? Should we approach them in a way where people feel maybe like we feel like we're maybe better than them, or that they're
Like a judgmental, like.
yes, kind of maybe judgmental. Yeah, thank you. And
No.
we see this application right here. You see, it does not show any room for judgment here. But what it shows is that if we do certain things, there's going to be certain effects. And if we don't do certain things, it'll bring different effects. Right? So when we're talking with people, I think one of the important things to realize is that Christ, when he was on this earth, he was very gentle with people. The little children loved him. They wasn't running from him. And so as Christians, when we talk about the health message, I'll share with you now. I didn't share this earlier, but I had a very bad experience with the health message when I was 14 years old. I was at an academy in the Carolina Conference, and I won't say which one.
There's only two.
Can I say?
Well, you got
Can I say what?
Listen, I'm going to leave your brother to figure out which one it was. And I had a Bible professor. Now, I told you I was raised a clean meat eating Seventh-day Adventist. This Bible pastor told me, he said, guess what? He said, if you continue to eat meat, you're going to go to hell. In those words. And I told him where he could go in those same words. I was 14, right? I got my mouth washed out with soap. And as well as I should have, because I shouldn't have been disrespectful. But the reason that I'm sharing this with you is because at that age, or really at any age in people's walks and lives, when you approach people in a wrong direction, when you're telling them that everything that they know is wrong, and then you turn around and you really try to enforce your issue or your structure, you find resistance. And I well could have simply walked away from the church. And I know some folks who have come to church for the first time, and they have brought, guess what? Meat dishes, right? And instead of being very kind and gentle with people, sometimes we might be a little harsh on them. And I've seen people turn around, and that was the last time that they came to church. And that brings me to a very interesting point here. Jesus ate fish when he was on this earth. I think it was a different structure because guess what? The fish back then was not contaminated. It didn't have the plastics in them that our fish have today. They didn't have the mercury in them. But here's the thing. Why did Jesus eat the fish? Any ideas or thoughts on that? The cerebral palsy actually tells us that the reason is because Jesus cared more about people than he did fish. Jesus' goal when he was on this earth was to, guess what? It was to win souls. And so he understood, if you will, the bigger picture. Now today, in our society, we have actually kind of a reverse situation where, guess what? The meat isn't healthy. Karen and I actually know someone who, I take that back. We don't know them. It's a friend of ours who actually died not too many years ago from, guess what, mad cow disease. We're not talking about 20 years ago. We're talking about just a few years back. So you think that it's gone. You see, one of the things we understand is that the meat will become contaminated in the last days, right? And so we want to do the optimal things that we can to improve our health. Now, that said, let's go into our presentation here. Hope I didn't step on any toes here, but I hope that you guys will have a good understanding of why we want to talk about this. So let's talk about hypertension or high blood pressure, the secret killer, okay? Can you imagine, if you will, that you have a life-threatening disease that could take your life suddenly without any warning? The problem is you're one of the millions of people that have it, but you don't even know that you have it. Worldwide, hypertension affects over 600 million people, and we are told by the 21st century that it will be over 1.3 billion people that are going to be affected by hypertension alone. So hypertension really affects a lot of people. What you're going to find, though, is that these all intermingle with each other. Now, the thing is that the problem is it affects 1 in 3 people. Now, we have a very small group here, but we have at least 9, 10 people. So that's telling me that even like in this room, statistically, you're going to have 3 people struggling with hypertension. So it's very common to have this illness. Now, the thing about hypertension is it really doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care if you're a man or a woman, whether you're rich or poor. And in fact, it's becoming more and more common in the United States that young people are even starting to develop, guess what, hypertension. And did you know that 1 out of 3, that 50% of all people that have hypertension are undiagnosed? So, now let's put a practical point in here. Is there anyone in here who's not been checking their blood pressure?
Who has not been?
Who has not been? Anybody in here not checking their blood pressure?
You mean on a regular basis?
Well, yeah, well, not necessarily on a regular basis, because obviously if you don't have it, then you obviously would need to check it on a regular basis,
I don't have it.
right? But you still should check every now and then, right, just to make sure that you're not struggling, right? Because this is something that happens. Now, it's amazing to me how we can be in a country like this, and because you know we've been talking about a lot of different cultural things and stuff like that. But the United States is pretty well known to be, guess what, to have good medical care. But I scratch my head when I hear that, and I think, well, how can we have such good medical care? Millions of people are dying every year. You know, it really it's not logical to me, right?
It's not.
Now, many people struggle with even just a small amount of hypertension or high blood pressure. Now, you wonder, is that really significant, even if it's a small amount? Did you know that 70% of people that have their first heart attack, guess what? They have the symptom of, guess what? High blood pressure. And even a higher percentage of people who had their first stroke, 80%, guess what? They had high blood pressure. So this is something very simple that we can do. So when we are doing, now to tie this back into evangelism, we like to get things out into the community. We like to see community involvement. So we oftentimes do a health fair or something of this nature. And one of the things that we do, one of the very first things we do, is we check, guess what, their blood pressure. You see, hypertension or high blood pressure will affect many different things. It will affect your eyesight. It will affect your pancreas. You know, I was talking to someone, I won't mention who it was here today, talking about having type 1 diabetes, right? So if you have even type 1 diabetes, and yet you have high blood pressure, guess what? It could cause you to get more problems with your pancreas, right? A lot of your different organs you'll find that have issues when you have hypertension, even though you're not aware that you have it. But what's even worse on that is guess what? Many times this is not irreversible. This is why it's better to catch it in advance, and then you can try to do something about it. So my question is, do you have high blood pressure? Do you know today if you have high blood pressure? Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but maybe you do. But what is exactly high blood pressure, okay? So high blood pressure, or blood pressure, is a measurement of force that is applied in the artery walls, okay? And you have two different measurements, right? You have the systolic, which is your high measurement, and this is the measurement that is when the heart pumps and it's given the most pressure to push that blood through that artery, okay? That's your systolic. That's going to be your high number. And then your lower number, or your diastolic, is going to be when the blood is in the artery and there's still pressure, but the heart is at rest, okay? So that's an easy way to hopefully to remember what blood pressure is. And blood pressure, we have some signs here of what would be a good blood pressure. Well, an ideal blood pressure for your systolic should be anywhere between 90 and 120, okay? And then for your low, your diastolic would be anywhere between 60 and 80. That's your normal range for having your blood pressure. Now, you could be low on your blood pressure, and there are people who do have low blood pressure. But what we have found is that if a person has low blood pressure, that unless there's something affecting them, for example, if they're a little dizzy or something like that, that they really don't need to be too terribly alarmed by having a little lower blood pressure. Now, as you start to get higher and higher, then obviously you need to be more concerned. We were doing a health expo one time, and we received a gentleman, and we took his blood pressure, and his blood pressure, his systolic was 200, and his diastolic was well over 100. Now, here we are at a health fair. What do you think we did for this gentleman?
Garlic.
No garlic. While garlic is good, and I would recommend it for blood pressure, we call 911.
Yeah,
Of course.
it's true.
Because you see, this man was a walking stroke.
Yeah, it's true.
And while the things that we are talking about are very, very helpful, one of the things that you'll find is that sometimes that you need to work with allopathic medicine. The same way it's going to be if you're diabetic. If your diabetes is through the ceiling, yes, a walk like we talked today is wonderful. But it's not necessarily going to be your first avenue of getting together, right? So, you know, our objective is to help people. And if our objective is to help people and to represent Christ, I don't think a man laying on the floor, passing out and maybe having a stroke is a good sign for having, you know, good health care, right? So would you have shared Jesus at that point? The answer is no. So we want to do the best we can with the abilities that we have. And so that's why I believe that education is extremely valuable. Because yes, these things do work, but there again, there's a point in time when things are at a critical level that sometimes you need a little bit higher care. What would have been optimal would have been to cut the person before it was so high so that we could stop it from being that high. But guess what? You never are in an optimal situation in this world, right? So what exactly causes hypertension? Well, just like the definition that we saw this morning and again today, guess what? Hypertension is caused 90% of it by what? Our lifestyle. Our lifestyle is what causes, for most people, hypertension. Now, if there is 90% that causes hypertension, then I guess that begs the question, are there people that have genetic propensities to have higher blood pressure? And the answer is yes, right? So that for them is not caused by lifestyle, okay? But the focus that we have is on people who are struggling with lifestyle. So what are some of the things that actually cause, let's break this down a little bit, the hypertension, your lifestyle? Well, one of them is obesity. Did you know that for every pound of fat that you have, that your arteries have to carry your blood an extra mile? Can you see how that would raise your blood pressure right there? You see? So very important to understand that obesity plays a role. What else plays a role? A high sodium intake. In countries around the world where they don't have high sodium intake, guess what? They typically don't have high blood pressure. The amount of cases that they have are greatly reduced. Now here in the United States, we typically get about 2 teaspoons of sodium a day, and it's recommended we get about 1 teaspoon a day. Okay? So we're getting basically double the amount of sodium that we need. Smoking. Smoking just one cigarette will elevate your blood pressure for about 30 minutes. So for those who are smokers, right, that means that if you smoke a typical pack a day or more, guess what? Your blood pressure or your hypertension will be elevated most of the day. Now, let's pull this back into the practical corner again. Probably no one here is smoking, right? But if we're working with people, we know people that, guess what, smoke, right? If you know someone who's smoking and they say to you, listen, I'm struggling with my hypertension, how hard is it to just simply report a statistic to them and say, listen, you know, if you're smoking, it's causing your blood pressure to go up. This is very simple stuff, but yet very practical. And I think a lot of times that we want to, you know, be fearful in this to share with people. But you know what? Let me ask you a question. Is there any harm done to anybody who would stop smoking? So you can't hurt them by saying, listen, you know, stopping smoking would be helpful for that.
Well, a lot of times that I know I have a family member and they would like to stop smoking, but it's just, they find it so difficult.
It is. I have a brother who smokes as well, and he knows better, right? Mm-hmm. But here's the deal. At the end of the day, my understanding is that it's actually harder to get off cigarettes than it actually is marijuana. I mean, for the people that I have talked to, that it is so addictive. You know, they put chemicals and stuff in there to make sure that you stay addicted to these things. Yeah. So
I mean, so it seems as if you're going to say it, you need to have a resource to help them.
That's optimal. Obviously, step one is a way of getting it out there. So let's pull that into something practical for just a second then. So what would you do in that case?
In that case, I mean, like, my relative, I've never smoked, so I don't know what.
You don't know how to relate.
I don't know how to relate. I don't know what they're going through, and all I can do is understand what I've been told. You know, but as far as how to relate to them, realistically, I don't.
So this is interesting. So my question, we have people sneaking in the side door over here. That's okay. I'm just kidding. So here's the thing. You may not have actually had any practical communion with smoking, right? But you know the facts. Mm-hmm. Usually the person in this scenario, they may know the facts as well. What they need is someone who can be kind and compassionate, and somebody that they can be accountable to, you know? Yes,
One of the things that I knew about smoking is that the people that do that, they are trying to, they're kind of anxious people. So they are just trying to divert the anxiousness through that. So maybe that is something that we could help them just to try to see what is causing that anxiousness.
that goes back to what we talked about this morning, right? Ascertaining the cause.
Mm-hmm.
If you can find the cause,
Yeah.
then you can go to change those habits, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and change the conditions even. So the thing is that we have things to offer. Maybe, and my brother points out well here, that maybe for your family, what you need to do first is find out, is this something that they're interested in doing? Is this something that they could potentially make a goal? And if they do, then you can sit down and guess what? Map out a game plan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, that's something that we, you know, I wish the church actually did more of the stop smoking programs. They used to do that a lot.
Yeah, they used to.
That seems to be something that's kind of went by the wayside, but you know, that's where we're at. But you know, there are ways that we can, you know, minister to people by finding out what their needs are and a way to help them. Let's move on to caffeine on talking about for hypertension. Did you know, by the way, that caffeine is the #1 used drug around the world? Furthermore, and I hate to say this, but did you know that there's actually more caffeine in dark chocolate than even in a standard soda? Yes, the dark
Yep.
chocolate.
Dark chocolate.
You can see in a serving fluid ounce of caffeine, like for example, like Coke and Pepsi, you got 3.5 milligrams per ounce of caffeine. But in dark chocolate, you have 12.9. It's actually almost as high as the energy drinks and very close to even coffee. Even milk chocolate actually even has more, guess what, than sodas and tea. Now, a lot of people don't realize that.
Because maybe they don't feel it. They don't feel the zing.
Well, you typically don't usually see those emotions unless you get a real high dose of caffeine, usually. Another cause that we have for hypertension, guess what, is plugged arteries. Now, this makes just good sense, because when you talk about, you know, plaque buildup, one of the things that we learned, right, was that you know, if you have a diet high in saturated fat, that's going to cause issues. By the way, on that plugged arteries, imagine there, if you will, that you're talking about for your blood pressure, and you have your pressure where your artery is nice and wide, and it's just kind of it doesn't have anything blocking the way. But when you narrow that like that, it makes it under a lot more pressure. Think about it this way. You know, when you were young, and maybe you still do this, because sometimes I still do it too. You go outside and you get your hose, right? And you take your thumb and you put it over the top and see how far you get the water to squirt. That's how you're building that pressure. It's doing the same thing in your body when that fat is going around and building up a plaque around those arteries. Physical inactivity. Did you know that physical inactivity also is associated with high blood pressure? Pretty amazing. Now, I'm hopefully try to spend a little bit less time on talking about what we have than talking about the solutions. So the question is how do we treat high blood pressure? Well, this is fairly simple, in my opinion. The first one, obviously, that we would look at would be medications. Now, again, if a person's severely high with their high blood pressure, I'm going to tell you that they probably need to be on medication, at least for a short period of time. But what we find with all medications is, guess what? They don't make a cure. All they are doing is masking the symptoms. And oftentimes they have side effects. So the side effects for medication, guess what, for high blood pressure, are such things as depression, insomnia, dehydration, cramps, and other things. I mean, there are so many things that you find that this medications has a problem with. So while they may be your first or initial way of defense, the question is, can we find some better things? Is there a better way? You know, there have been a number of scientific studies that have shown that, guess what? A comprehensive lifestyle approach to hypertension would give superior results even without the distressing side effects. Now, again, see, this is why I go back to, this is why I showed that thing from the government, that definition, because we see all through here. It's going to talk about this, lifestyle change, lifestyle change. In most cases, did you know that just by exercising, that you can reverse the high blood pressure without any drugs? So here are some simple ways that we can do this. Remember, we talked about obesity being one of the main problems. So guess what? One of the first things would be to reduce our weight. If you reduce your weight, you reduce the amount of area that the blood has to flow. By that, you would be obviously deducting your hypertension. Now you see when I'm sitting up here and I'm talking about this, my struggle is because you sit there and you see this and you say, well, that just should be common sense. But you see, when a person's in this predicament, when they're in their situation, oftentimes that they don't see the problem or the solution that's right in front of them. The next thing that we talked about sodium, right? Sodium we know causes high blood pressure. Well, the simple answer to that is to reduce our sodium intake. Now, there's a couple of different ways to do this. By the way, salt is salt. In other words, a teaspoon of sodium is a teaspoon of sodium, right? That sounds good, but here's the deal. If you have table sodium, and Karen's going to talk about this in the cooking class, a teaspoon of sodium that is just table salt, guess what? It's all salt. If you have Himalayan pink salt, which has 84 trace minerals, guess what? It won't have as much sodium in it because there are fillers or other things in there. Now, it's not a significant amount, so it's not like I say, you know, you need, I can take, 2 teaspoons of Himalayan pink salt. You still need to keep it right at the same level. But there is a difference in the amount of sodium intake from something like a Himalayan pink salt versus a table salt. But where is the main area that we can get rid of sodium? Processed foods. Our processed foods, our canned green beans, our boxes of macaroni and cheese, these kinds of things. These are the things that, guess what, are high in sodium. If we got rid of the processed foods, you would eliminate 77% of your sodium from your diet. That would actually put you, guess what, under a teaspoon, right? In other words, when you're eating fresh fruits and vegetables, even though you add salt to them, you're still way under the amount that you would need. Your processed food is your big killer here. Is that helpful information for somebody who's struggling with hypertension? It's very simple. And in fact, it's very interesting because, it has been shown that, guess what? Just lowering your salt intake by 2 grams, just 2 grams, can actually take some person from being hypertensive to not having hypertension anymore. That's a small amount. So let's just say that you have a person who's struggling, with having to need some processed foods. Let's just say that they're either not educated or they're busy for whatever reason, right? But what if we were to be able to take and make a solution? All right, back to the smoking thing. Maybe they're not going to just quit cold turkey. Maybe they could take 1 day a week where they say, all right, I'm not going to smoke this day, to take some steps. In the same process, we can do that with the processed foods. Maybe we could have, say, 1 day a week that you could help somebody by simply just taking processed foods out of the diet for 1 day a week and not all week long. And guess what? That would lower them by that 2 grams, right? And so therefore could actually help them with their hypertension and their blood pressure. It just seems really simple, doesn't it? It just seems logical and very sensible. And avoid caffeine and alcohol pretty much at all costs. The alcohol actually causes, just like the plaque, to narrow the arteries. Okay? So that's how it's going to affect it. And by the way, caffeine affects your high blood pressure in a different way. What it does is, even if you're not hypertensive, the caffeine will come in. What it does is give you just a short bolt of high blood pressure, and then it pulls it back. So it's giving you, even people who aren't even have blood pressure issues, it causes them a problem. Very interesting there. Now, so when we talk about caffeine, I like this spider web right here. What do you think about that? Let me ask you a question. How does the spider get his food? He traps it in this beautiful web, right? God designed the spider to be able to catch his food within this lovely symmetrical web that he built. Now, back in 1948, a pharmacologist by the name of Peter Witt decided to study the spiders when they were given drugs. Now, the reason that he started the study was, guess what? He was doing a topic, and I don't know what it was on, but they were keeping him up while he was working. They, because he's up late at night, the spiders were bothering him, so he decided to try this test on the spiders. So what he did was he gave the caffeine to the spider. He gave what's called a 10 UG amount of caffeine to the spider, and this is what he came up with. This is the spider's web on caffeine. Now, what they noticed was that if it was really high, that the spider web was smaller in size, and it was very unsymmetrical like this. My question for you is if the spider uses that to catch his food, how well is he going to do on this guy?
Probably fasted.
Yeah, he's fasting. There you go. I like that. He's fasting. So you can see how it affects. Now, the thing is that, obviously when you bring that down to us, that we have some of these very similar struggles, but we don't seem to recognize them. They actually did a study with children as well, and what they did was they had the children come in and they did testing all day long. So in the morning, they brought them in, and when they did their test, they were to have no caffeine that morning. And the children were all writing their letters, were nice and straight and very legible. But after lunch, they gave them caffeine, and what they noticed was that their letters like this started to slant, and they were becoming unlegible. Now, the kids didn't recognize that they had any issue, right? But there are signs that you can see. Very interesting about caffeine. And quit smoking. Obviously, if one cigarette's raising your blood pressure for a half hour, then if you can quit smoking, that would be very beneficial. Again, all of these things, when we see people that have these issues, there's a way that we could be a better help to them. Reducing our fat intake. Obviously, fat is a huge issue. So a diet high in fiber and very low in fat will lower the blood pressure by 10 points, even if you don't even change your salt. So if you just simply decrease your fat intake, it's going to lower your blood sugar even without changing the salt.
I have a question. How long does that take effect? Like, let's say you change that part of your diet. How quickly would that, for someone that has hypertension?
Well, it's really, I think a lot of that's going to have to do with how you're able to expel the fat from your body. I think that's going to take some different things for different people. Obviously, if you were to take the fat out of the diet, maybe throw in some high fiber, right? And then maybe to do some other ways to detoxify to get that fat away from the cell, from that artery, right? That it's going to be faster. To give you the answer very specifically, I can't answer that.
But I could say in my case, that because that happened to me,
Okay.
and it took me, in my case, it took me some years. Why? Because I didn't change that fast. So I guess if you do the change really radical, and if you're
It'd be quicker.
maybe quicker, if your body, how could I say, responds
Yeah.
in a good way, because sometimes when you do some things like that too quick, too radical, your body's going to rebel. It's like,
Of course.
what are you going to do with me? So,
So, in essence, an answer to your question, instead of saying the timing of it, if we were to take these ideas that we're stressing right here, and to implement maybe small amounts of them at a time, then you'll start to watch things fall. You notice that you started to see the results, right? And I find that it's interesting, this is part of the diabetes, but what we see at the Lifestyle Center is that people in 10 days are responding well enough that they may not be able to, like they had, came in on an insulin pump, but they are doing radical things. But when they're doing those radical things, they're also involved with being able to get rid of those impurities properly. If you can't get rid of the impurities properly, you'll still have a struggle there, because it can actually cause a lot of harm in your system. I have a sister who lost a lot of weight very rapidly, and the toxins weren't able to get out of her body, and she seemed to be very sick for a long period of time, because of that struggle. Good question. So one of the ways that we could help with changing that low-fat diet is obviously a diet like what we had here for lunch today, right? By the way, isn't that awesome? I don't know what you guys think. I've seen a lot of fruit here. Aren't fruits amazing? I mean, they just taste so good. And that, for me, is an interesting thing. If you're talking to someone who's struggling with a high-fat diet, fruits are actually, to me, are almost better than vegetables for a person. The reason being, all right, let's just say that you're a meat eater, okay? And so you like a steak and baked potato or something, right? And of course you want a lot of sour cream, butter, and cheese on your potato, right? And this is your palate. And you say, oh, let's try some steamed asparagus. They could wrinkle their nose, maybe, that might be not something in their wheelhouse. But if you say something like, let's try some good grapes or blueberries. I mean, that doesn't sound offensive, you know what I'm saying? Fruits, and by the way, fruits.
offensive.
Well, think about it. When we're in heaven, and the original diet was, guess what? Fruits and nuts and grapes, even before the vegetables were added in. Now, we need the vegetables to supplement now. But guess what? But our palate, the sugars that are in there turn to glucose very quick. So therefore, and they're very good tasting. Blueberries, like I had a nice big thing. I had the pineapple, right, and the strawberries and blueberries. They're very palatable. So for those who are struggling, and someone says to them, listen,
That's
you
true.
need to eat more vegetables. For some people, it might be easier for them to transition better a little bit with the fruits.
That's true.
Very interesting to me. And lastly on this, and not the least, is exercise. Are you ready, boss man?
Sure.
Good. So one of the best things that you can do, guess what, for hypertension is exercise. We're told with studies that just as little as 1 day a week, just 1 day a week of exercise, just imagine that, is as effective as medication in lowering blood pressure. Now, does this give you an army of suggestions or things that you can see that with people who are struggling with these things, that they can try some different things? If they try one area, for example, with my brother here who started changing his diet, and he starts to see things work out, then maybe a light comes on and says, hey, if I try this might even be a little better. All these things all add up, right? And so the more that you do all of them to combine, you'll find that you're going to have, guess what, a better lifestyle health. Any questions before we move on to heart disease, or comments, suggestions?
When you So you were talking about the smoking part, and you were talking about, you know, people kind of weaning themselves off things. I just wanted to share that, so I have a friend, who would smoke easily 2 packs a day of cigarettes. I mean, he would be smoking one, and he has the next one in the other hand, ready to go. And so, he used, a method which to me was a little bit unorthodox, but he weaned himself off using this little vaping pens, which I know that they're not great at all, but he used that and slowly reduced the amount of nicotine to get himself completely off. That's what he did to help himself quit smoking. Now he doesn't do anything at all. Now it's completely gone.
So, in light of that, now you said it's unconventional, but it's successful.
It was for him, yeah.
So, what's interesting is I find it that we oftentimes want to, how do I say this kindly, set ourselves in a judgment position on some of these things. And you know, I remember one time I went to a church, and there was a gentleman who just showed up to church, and he was a smoker. And he was smoking outside, and an elder came over to the church and said to me, he says, "You don't want to see this guy smoking outside the church." He says, "That'll affect your kids, right?" And I said, I said, "My kids are going to see people smoking somewhere." And I said, "I don't know, but maybe if this guy continues to come to church, maybe one day he'll decide to stop smoking." You know? And so like, this guy was really like trying to say, we don't want him here because he's smoking. And to me, that was about the farthest thing from my mind, because I'm sitting there thinking, does he have a better chance of stopping smoking with the church itself or without the church itself? You know, people need help, yes.
Yeah, I have a question, and it's directly to the process of church. You know, we have some people in the past that they're willing to get baptized, but they're still struggling with letting that cigarette go. And so, you know, as a church, people, should we have it? No, I want us to have something to help those people, because they want to get baptized. But how do we help them to not being judgmental or not kind of shy them away, because we have an experience in the past. They left because, you know, and I felt bad because the church didn't have anything to help those kinds of people. And so, you know, that's something that I wish that the church has something in place for people like that.
Well, you know, like I said, obviously we used to have the stop smoking program. But we have
Free.
Breathe Free now. So there are things out there, but the interesting thing is that to me, obviously I think that, you know, it's hard for me to say to bring somebody in the church who's openly saying, I can't be the club member, right? But the thing is that on the other hand, how are we helping this person? How are we handling these people? Do they see compassion from us? Do they see someone who says, listen, let's work with this. Let's come up with some game plans. Let's have some strategies. And guess what? At that point, even if you don't know or don't have a strategy, guess what? You can always reach out. You know, the general conference, and then there's other entities that can provide resources for this. You know, a lot of the self-supporting ministries, guess what, can give this type of information so that you can say, all right, these are some ways that we've found successful in that area to help. So I think that's a great question, and I feel like I wish our church had a different mindset in saying we need to help people and understand that it's an issue and a struggle, rather than saying we don't know how to cope with this and we kind of turn our backs a little bit and then they end up going on their way.
It seems like it's such a very sensitive, because it's almost like, where do you draw the line, or are you supposed to draw the line as a member, that if someone gets baptized and they're still struggling with smoking, and after they're baptized and they're still smoking, then they have an office in the church and they're still struggling with smoking. And then that office is ahead of something and they're still struggling with smoking. At what point, you know, and I know that we need to have things in place. I guess those are the systems that we need to start planning for on how we can be of help, you know, and not just sit back and just let it go. And we don't have anything in place.
Yeah, and
But it's almost like a
that's a different story altogether. Karen looks like she's busting this. You look like she's ready to, listen,
And I know that's a true story.
yeah, okay, so, yeah, from the viewpoint from what I see is that, you know, when a person is being baptized, that they're saying, I not only believe, but my goal is to be doing this. The gentleman that I was referring to specifically, I happen to know in that case that he ended up getting baptized, and before he was baptized, he was he said, listen, you need to be, you know, not smoking when you're baptized. It doesn't mean people can't backslide, but it means that they're saying, listen, I've got a commitment, I'm working on this, and I'm not going to do this. And when you get into these other areas, I mean, a person who's now starting to hold office and stuff should have hopefully a better handle on their walk with Christ by that point, you know. So, you know, that's a struggle. But on the other hand, we don't want to turn those people away, but that doesn't mean that they need to be operating in the church, because then it looks like, you know, well, there are no standards or reasons. Yes.
So, what do you, I guess, so what do you what is your point of view on those people that wanted to get baptized, but they're in the process of, they're struggling to get rid of this habit that they have? Because the point is, everybody's struggling in their life. It doesn't have to be cigarette, like we were just.
Principles apply, not things.
Yeah, and so, is it, how do we say yes to the person, okay, we'll get baptized, you get baptized. And what the church responsibility on that decision, okay?
As Kathy is asking that question, the thought came into my mind is maybe not so much of what for them. The question may not be posed towards them, but towards us.
Yes,
Towards us as far as what do we have in place to help.
yes,
Because I know it's putting the burden on them,
yeah.
but they've come to the church, so they obviously have a desire.
And we have one person that walked away because we didn't fulfill what she wanted to do at that time, and she knows when she's ready to get baptized. But she didn't see that happen.
She didn't see the
I mean,
help.
she didn't see that, okay, well, I'm gonna turn down because of my habit, and so I feel bad because she knows her struggle. And so I feel bad because the church didn't provide.
Well, let me ask you a question. I don't want to try to get into the middle of a church struggle or issue. Can a person not come to church without having to be a member? Can a person not come to church and feel free to walk through your doors and to be able to be a part of your church, but until such a time that they were ready, maybe not to extend fellowship at that point, but in the meantime, instead of just letting it go, like you said, find ways. What ways can we help? And oftentimes, see, this falls under Christ's method, where Christ says, he worked with people, but he found out what their problem was, but then he started to solve their problem. He started to find ways, because what we find is that people who are searching in this area, it's a real struggle, and they have real needs. But they need real support, right? And so, you know, the church, that's the church's obligation to try to help that person. It's just like, if you were to think about this person as your brother or your sister, your physical brother or sister, and that you knew that this was hurting them, you would want something better for them. And that's what we should be wanting for the people who are struggling. We do need to find things that are better for them. Okay, let's move on to heart disease, because it's gonna have some of those same things, that's maybe we'll discuss when we get back up again. Did you know that around the world, that millions and millions of people die from cardiovascular disease? In fact, in 2015, over 17 million people from all types of heart disease died around the world. Do you know that's about the population of the country of Ecuador? And this number is expected to rise to about 24 million by the year 2030. These are people who died, not people that have it, but people who died from different types of heart disease. Now, heart disease globally, if you talk about like heart attacks, coronary heart disease, that killed almost 9 million people last year. Just in heart disease alone, not in coronary heart disease, I should say. That's like the city of New York. It's almost, guess what? Anybody here happen to know the population of North Carolina? Population of North Carolina is very similar, because I just did this in Michigan. The population in North Carolina is about 10.5 million people. That's almost like wiping out your entire state. 1 year, the people who die from heart disease. Simply amazing. So the question for the heart disease that we're going to ask is, who do you think is next? And by the way, it is the leading cause of death in both men and women, and accounts for up to 20% of all deaths for people under the age of 65. Now, the thing is that just imagine that you had a jumbo jet that crashed and it had 200 to 300 people in it. There'd be lots of investigations, right? I mean, it just doesn't happen every day. Now imagine this. What if 6 jumbo jets crashed in a day, killing over 2,100 people a day? We would want answers, wouldn't we? We want to know why these planes are flying out of the sky.
Terrorist attack.
Yeah, you would think many things, right? That's funny, you call it a terrorist attack, guess what? It's a terrorist attack.
But
The terrorist is the devil, right? It's not a man, but he's attacking us. When we talk about these health issues, when we talked about earlier, we talked about Daniel, but the Garden of Eden was mentioned. This goes all the way back, and the devil says, listen, I got a better plan, right? But we see how his plan works. I mean, is it that hard to see through what he's trying to sell us? I mean, we see the people dying. Everybody's dying, right? So the question is why is there no news?
Much money involved.
Too much money. Well, that's true. Well, that's true. But we're not going
Business.
down that road. The
Business.
thing I'm going to say is that it's just normal. We have considered it normal now. Obviously, if you follow the money trail, you're going to have a struggle there, because it's true. But we have accepted it as a cultures around the world. It's just what happens, you know. And the problem is that for heart disease, guess what? It comes very, very sudden, and oftentimes, in fact, 12% of people that have their first heart attack, guess what? They die. So just right then and there. But heart disease comes upon us just that quick, and we just don't recognize it. Now, it's been working in the background for years, but we just haven't recognized it. Now, one of the things that is good news, right, is that in the U.S. alone, that they've discovered that we could help 25%, this is our government talking, of people with their heart disease and stroke. Is that good news? So, right? It's 27%. But you know, again, if we go back to lifestyle would suggest that, guess what? 90% of these people would be helped. So, if we were looking in this room here, guess what? Somebody's gonna have a heart attack and die. What if we help that person? What if we were able to help someone to relieve this pain and suffering and this loss and this that happened way too soon in their lives? So, what are the steps to conquering heart disease? Well, I think the first thing is to do, obviously, is to understand how it works. So heart disease obviously develops silently over years and years, where the vital arteries that we were talking about start to get blocked. Now, it was interesting, the Spirit Prophecy and also John Harvey Kellogg came up with this interesting little comment. Perfect circulation equals perfect health. Do you see how that would be helpful in this case? Because if you had no blockage in these arteries, if they weren't being narrowed from the things that we talked about, then guess what? We wouldn't be struggling with these illnesses. But you know, it's just like these rusted pipes right here. When your pipes are clean, they're going to be able to handle more pressure. But as they get older, and as they get a little bit more rust, things happen, right? And so it's the same way with us. And so all this time, instead of helping, we're causing actually more problem and more pressure buildup. Then it looks like at the end that there's going to be an issue. And this is why we've accepted it as a normal thing. But it's just simply not normal. In those waiting countries who are low income, guess what? They have a lot less heart disease. Why do you think that would be?
More exercise, more.
Well, they're doing these things. But obviously, guess what? They can't afford, we were just in India. They can't afford diets high in saturated fats. They're eating more beans and rice, right?
Simple.
When you find in countries where they're eating a lot of beans and rice, guess what? Their heart disease is a lot less than when you're eating lots of high saturated fats. Now here in the United States, it's
There
got,
you go.
why are we laughing? Does that look like some of us?
We can
Cholesterol
relate.
is now starting to show, not only in the elderly, but even teenagers, is already starting to show plaque buildup. In fact, 50% of our teens today now are starting to have a plaque buildup into their bodies. And if you think that's amazing, 50% of our arteries will be plugged. Not 50% of the people, but 50% of our artery will be plugged by the time we turn 40. These are the stats from the U.S. But that makes sense. Look at all the people who are struggling with heart disease, right? This is why they have, guess what, so many heart stents being put in, right? So many heart bypasses. And I'm going to tell you, I have plenty in my family, because guess what? They are eating diets high in saturated fats. So what is a heart attack? So a heart attack is actually where there's an actual blockage in the heart, so the blood stops pumping to it, and that part of the heart muscle actually dies. So what are some of the signs for heart disease? I think this is important to know. You probably know most of them, but guess what? Chest pain is obviously one. You know, a person feels like in their arms that it may be an issue. It can be in your jaw or your neck. There can be all kinds of pain there. But sweating, a cold sweat, and sometimes even for people, guess what? An impending sense of doom, like they just know. You know what I'm saying? These are all signs of a heart attack. What should we do if someone has these issues? We call 911, right? Because they need medical care, and they need medical care quickly. You see, eating some cabbage and carrots at this point isn't going to change that issue right there. This is why, well, lifestyle is, guess what, it's preventative. You need to do it before things happen, but things can get out of hand. So who is at risk that you know with heart disease? Let's go over some things to see if you can figure out if you have an issue for heart disease. So here are some of the risk factors, okay? Let's start with smoking. Smoking was an issue, right, with hypertension? Well, did you know that for heart disease, that 10% of all heart disease can be directly related to smoking? Okay? But here's an interesting fact. So here's one of these things. This is a spot where you can help people. The person who's smoking, we talked about the high blood pressure for the person. But guess what? If they stop smoking, even after they've had a heart attack, they've increased their chance of not having a second heart attack by 50%. That's helpful to people. And by the time they've had their first heart attack, now they're starting to think, well, maybe I've gotten a second chance. Maybe I can do this, right? So we have help, even when it seems to be too late. You know, there's something like, even when it seems like God's lady is always on time, right? Always something to help with that. High blood pressure. Did you know that in one study, each time that the blood pressure rose by 20 points on the systolic and 10 points on the diastolic, that the heart risk doubled? Your heart disease goes up that much every time your blood pressure goes up. You see how they are starting to go hand in hand, right? And this is even with someone who has started out with a good blood pressure. In other words, somebody who was like under 120. The third issue here is high cholesterol. High cholesterol builds the plaque in the arteries, and of course we know that that's going to cause this high pressure. Did you know that just this one area of heart disease takes over 2.6 million lives each year? Pretty staggering, isn't it? And we know that we can help these people. In fact, there was a study done on the countries with the lowest amount of cholesterol intake versus the countries with the highest amount of cholesterol. And what they found is there was a direct correlation with their heart disease from being Japan down being the lowest amount, having the least amount of heart disease, all the way up to Finland, who had, guess what, the highest amount, and they had the highest amount of heart disease. But Finland decided to do something about that. They decided to try a study. So Finland did a study with 30,000 people, okay? And this was the results from this study. That the men reduced their death from heart disease by 55%. And the women actually went from 55% to 70%. They even did better than the men. Now, interestingly enough, by just simply changing their lifestyle, it increased their life 7 years for men and 6 years for women. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Simply by changing their lifestyle. Dr. T. Colin Campbell, that we talked about earlier today, says this about saturated fats and heart disease. Evidence suggests that eating even just small amounts of animal-based foods is linked to many individuals to significantly higher rates of, guess what, cardiovascular disease. Of course it makes sense because of saturated fat, guess what it does? It locates the plaque into the arteries, right? Of course, we talked about the high weight. So excessive weight, guess what? It actually increases one's chance of having a heart attack by 60%. So guess what? We need to reduce the weight. And regular exercise. Those who participated in 150 minutes, 2.5 hours of physical activity each week, guess what? Found that their risk of heart disease was dropped down to 30% by simply just exercising a couple hours a week. So you can see this common theme here going through all of these guys. Alcohol. Obviously, alcohol is a major factor since it's causing your arteries to harden and to narrow. Obviously, we need to avoid that when all possible. Saturated fats, fats coming from the animals. They are primarily found in, guess what? Animal products, red meat mainly, lard, butter, and guess what? Our friend cheese. There's also another saturated fat that a lot of people overlook, It's actually very beneficial for you in many ways, which is coconut, but it is still a saturated fat. And if you're struggling with heart disease, guess what? You probably shouldn't be eating a lot of coconut oil because it is a saturated fat. Yet, it has many beneficial properties, so if you're not unhealthy, coconut oil is actually very good for you. Stress. Stress is the one disease that's interesting that affects everything more negatively. Did you know that people who have had a major argument, that when they have this argument, that oftentimes we find that they are having a heart attack or a stroke 1 to 2 hours after having an argument. This raising the stress is very hard on a person. These are these signs to see, do you have any issues that would be causing you? Oftentimes we think about our diet, we think about exercise, we think about these things as church, but we don't think about the stress issue. We a lot of times put that to pastor, you know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, we're in the church, we don't have stress, but I'm gonna tell you, everybody has some stress in their life. And did you know that by having diabetes, that it's going to cause you to have a 3 times higher amount of opportunity of having a heart attack? Now, this is what happened to my mom because of the diabetes. That's what she ended up having the heart attack. So that was her way. That's what happened for her. Everybody has their own journey through this interesting obstacle. Now, let's talk about diabetes for a minute. Before we do that, you guys want to stand up for a minute? I know that after lunch, on Saturday afternoon, that we start to slumber a little bit. Maybe we should get up, let's practice some breathing exercises. Should we do that for a minute? Let's do that. Karen, you come up and you want to do you want to do a digestion song? What kind of song would you like to do? Because she's got all these little quirky songs that, and I don't sing. You want to do fruit salad? Okay.
Everybody stand.
I have a question. Why did they all stand up when you said stand up? I said stand up, they all said that.
You have to stand with authority. All right, I just want you to follow me. Ready? Avocado, avocado, banana, banana. I did it wrong. Start again. Mango, mango, avocado, banana, banana. Shake it all together, shake it all together. Fruit salad, fruit salad. All right, that's our fruit salad song. We'll do it again now that I remember it. Okay, I haven't done it in a while. Mango, mango, avocado, banana, banana. Shake it all together, shake it all together. Fruit salad, fruit salad. All right, let's bump it now, right? I needed it too.
Karen, would you like to do the song?
No.
I believe that God's people should be a joyous people. We should have, you know, there's a lot of this information, and the problem for me up here is I really struggle because it's so simplistic in nature that I feel like it's over and over. So I'm just showing basically some different stats and stuff like that. But now we're going to go into diabetes. This is the one that was a struggle for my mom. Maybe many of you know about diabetes. I really can't tell you anything any better than what I shared with you this morning. But let's just go over diabetes for just a minute, and then we'll get ready for Karen's class. So, what is diabetes? Well, diabetes is, guess what? 2 types of diabetes. There is a type 1 and a type 2. Now, type 1 diabetes, this is what they call insulin independent. Now, this affects very few people. It's usually between 5 and 10% of the population, which is very interesting because guess what? It is not a lifestyle-related disease. It's not caused because of what you did. There's a problem in the pancreas where it's not producing either any or enough insulin in order to keep you going. So, very rare that happens. But even in type 1 diabetes, guess what? You can get some help with your issue that you're struggling with. Now, type 2 diabetes, it is much more of a challenge, isn't it, Karen? is with your insulin dependent. In other words, this is what happens due to our lifestyles. This is what happens, and this is one that affects, guess what? Almost 90% of the people have type 2 diabetes. 90%, let me rephrase in case I said that incorrectly. The people that have diabetes, 90% of those people are type 2 diabetics. In other words, the lifestyle caused diabetes is what is really the big culprit here, okay? And so what happens with this is that there's actually, oh, I missed the page, I'm sorry. Yeah, I missed the slide. Like you said, it's kind of to turn them all together. So there's an insulin blockage when you're in type 2 diabetes, meaning that there is something there that is causing that insulin to not work right with your system. So let's take a look at just a minute here and see how this works. So here's a diagram here, and you can see that in a normal process, your glucose and your insulin are coming down through the bloodstream, and they're going to get to your cell and get into it. The problem is that when you're type 2 diabetes, that there's a resistance to the insulin, and that your glucose and your insulin, they stay in the bloodstream. That's why you have, guess what, that high spike, because that's where they're getting that number, because the glucose is staying in the bloodstream. So what exactly is glucose? You can consider it basically, if you will, the fuel for your body. Now, at this point right here, think about it this way. When you're, all right, guys, there's a few guys in here. Let's just say, let's pick a nice car. What kind of car would we like to have? Lamborghini? That sounds good, okay? So let's just say that you end up and you've got this Lamborghini, right? You're a cool dude, right? You're driving down the road and you're looking nice. Me and my hair be blowing in the wind, right? So you got this Lamborghini. Now, you want to go get the highest amount of ethanol gas that you put in there, right? No? Well, why not? What does it take? Does it take a high octane premium fuel?
Premium fuel,
Yeah, premium fuel, right? If you have a Lamborghini, if we had two Lamborghinis side by side, you have a Lamborghini and you put your 85 ethanol loaded garbage gasoline in there, maybe throw in a little bit of sugar just along the side, just in case it wasn't running strong enough for you. And I put some premium fuel in mine, and we take off at the light. Who's winning the race? I am. You see, I put the right fuel into the body of that car. And it's the same way with our bodies. The fuel that we put into our bodies, this is the performance that we can expect to get out of it. Right? That's just logical sense. Now, so Karen's going to tell you that when you're looking for these foods, when you go into the grocery store, your best place to shop, guess what, is the perimeter, usually the store. That's usually where your fresh fruits and vegetables and your fresher foods are at, and you'll find all your processed foods oftentimes right in the middle. And that's kind of where they catch you. But stay on that outer edge. Get those fresh fruits and vegetables, because those are the better fuels for your body. So let's talk about insulin for just 1 second. The hormone insulin, it converts sugars and starches into energy, okay? It kind of works like a key to getting into the cell. The problem is that if that door lock is jammed up, how's it going to get in there? And see, when you're eating a diet that is high in fat, it's going to be covering that cell so that the insulin can't get into it. And that's when you have, guess what? A high rate of diabetes, that there's going to be some signs coming in. What are these signs for diabetics? Do you guys know the signs for diabetes? Mm-hmm. What are they? Some of the signs for diabetes is, guess what? That you're going to have excessive thirst. People drinking a lot of water, like they just can't get enough of it, right? That is one of the signs of diabetes. If you know someone who doesn't know. Because by the way, 25% of diabetes cases, even here in the United States, guess what, are undiagnosed. Very interesting. Now, Frequent urination is also another sign that you can see for diabetes. People that have to get up and go a lot, maybe there's a struggle there. And also an excessive appetite. You see people that, yes.
But of course, if you drink a lot of water, you only have to go.
Well, this is correct. But still, you shouldn't have to go every 15, 20 minutes, you know, like people that struggle with like a prostate issue and stuff like that. You have that issue. By the way, something we didn't talk about, to me, that's very practical in this line when we're talking about water. You know, we talked about how 75% of all Americans are chronically dehydrated. One of the best things in my mind that a person can do is when they wake up in the morning, guess what? Drink a couple glasses of water early in the morning, okay? To get yourself started. And what you want to do is start weaning yourself by the afternoon, because as you start getting a little bit older, guess what you're going to do? You're going to be starting to keep yourself up late at night, right? So start, to, if you can, get your water in the morning. And by the way, if you do that, you'll find it'll actually help to get your food digestion and everything processed ready to go. Very interesting.
One more thing, Ron. But I heard, I don't know if that's true or not, but I say if you drink little water when you go to sleep, that's will reduce the risk of heart attack. Is that true or not
Do you
true?
know that, Karen?
I'm not sure about that.
I don't know that.
It's very,
statistic.
it's possible, but I don't know that research.
Oh, okay.
Very interesting. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll see if we can look that up. We were here for a couple more days. We'll look at it and see if we can find anything, okay? Can my research person do that for me?
I certainly try to remember. I try to remember.
No me verás.
So the question is do you have diabetes? Do you know? And we talked about this, that 25% of all Americans don't even realize that they have diabetes. When we've done diabetes tests outside of the country, we found it to be very high. But you know something else that we found very interesting? People that lived in the cities had higher amounts of diabetes than those who lived in the country when we're talking about living overseas. And I think that's because when they're living in the country, they're much more active in the country than in the cities. It just seemed to be something that's very interesting there. And 1 out of 3, even here in the United States, guess what? 1 out of 3 people here in the United States are pre-diabetic. They are right on that verge to having diabetes. And one of the reasons is, guess what? We eat a lot of saturated fat. And saturated fat, in my opinion, is the worst thing that can happen for a diabetic. We always are thinking about the sugar because the sugar is what, or the glucose, is what makes the number high. But you have to look at the cause. We've talked about this several times. What is the cause? What's causing this? And the fat and the lack of fiber is our biggest culprit in type 2 diabetes. So what can we do for diabetes? Well, let's look at a couple of these things, and we've looked at these already a little bit earlier today, but let's do it again. Achieving a healthy weight. According to the Mayo Clinic, that if you achieve a healthy weight, that it will help disarm diabetes. That's pretty simple, right? Just by losing some weight. Now, how are the ways that we're going to lose some weight? Well, the first one I would tell you would say eat a diet low in saturated fats. Okay? Now, fats are actually valuable to us, but we don't need just a small amount of fat in our diet. In fact, it only makes up about 5 to 10% of our total intake of what we need. But eating a low-fat diet is very crucial in working with type 2 diabetes. By the way, at the Lifestyle Center, when they're working with people, that's one of the main things between that and guess what? The next thing of exercise. These are the things that they're really, really promoting for people. And I can tell you that Karen and I see in 10 to 11 days, people that come in with insulin pumps. We see this. We see people who are struggling with severe type 2 diabetes, getting ready for amputation. We see time and time again, 10 days later, they're no longer needing to take medication. It's just simply amazing what this gift that God has given to us. So if we're not eating a diet high in saturated fats, what are some things that we should eat? Well, food's very high in fiber. Things like chia seeds. What do you know about chia seeds? You like chia seeds? Do you know the chia seeds was, came out in the early 1970s? And we made what was called chia pets out of them. Remember, we put in little pets and, you know, they grew the hair and everything. Well, chia seeds were actually our introduction in the United States to microgreens. But we didn't realize it at that point that the chia seeds were actually a superfood. The word chia in the Mayan language actually means strength. And they actually used this, their warriors would use this as a food that they needed to take out with them when they were going to war, because they couldn't store like all these different types of foods. So this was the one food. If you had one food, this is what they felt that they needed, because it supplied all the nutrients that they needed in order to survive. Chia seeds are very, very valuable. They're extremely high in omega-3. But these types of food that are high in fiber, high in omega-3s, whole grain cereals, beans like we had for lunch today, peas, fruits, vegetables, these kind of foods, guess what? Because of the fiber content in them, will help you to automatically start to cleanse your body from all these oils and fats that you're suffering with, which cause the type 2 diabetes. And of course, regular exercise. You know, the American Diabetic Association says the number one thing that you can do for type 2 diabetes is exercise. Now, after we learned what we learned this morning about the GLUT4, right, that you can understand why that would be so important. So I want to go over that just one more time, just very briefly with you guys. GLUT4, you know, people who are struggling, GLUT4 is very unique in the fact that, number one, it only works, right, when we do what? GLUT4 only is activated when we do what? When we exercise, right? In other words, it stays dormant in our bodies when we're sedentary. But when we exercise, it actually causes the GLUT4 to start to activate, and that's when it will come up out of the cell, as we showed, and penetrate to get the glucose out of the bloodstream that we showed, where the glucose is staying because it can't get into the cell because the insulin receptor won't accept it. Okay? So exercise and diet, extremely, extremely valuable. All of the lifestyle choices are very good for this as well, but these two are what I would call would be keys in here. Now, with that, I know that you know people that are suffering with diabetes. My question is, I want to put it to you now. What are some things, how do you feel like you can help people in your community, your family members? How can you help them? How can we tie these things together to actually make a difference in this world? Sharing. Sharing, huh? Be an example. Actually, maybe working with people. We have a book, I don't have it in here, but Karen has it as a resource. Tomorrow afternoon, we won't do it today because it's still sundown, but we have a resource. We have it in English and in Spanish, but it's where you actually are involved with the person. For an example, it goes over all 8 of the lifestyles choices that we have. And what the book's designed to do is not for you to give to someone, but you to work with someone. In other words, let's say that you're going to take like 8 weeks, and you say to someone that you know that's struggling. All right, so we know that there's an issue here for diabetes in this case. Maybe we start meeting at the park with somebody because they don't know us that well. And we say, all right, so here's some things you can do this week. I'm going to do these as well. We'll meet back here next week. We'll walk again, and let's just see how this worked for you, and what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it, and this kind of thing. And so, very, very a valuable tool to help someone who's struggling with saying, how do I bridge this gap? How do I actually make this happen for someone who I don't know how to actually help? And so, to me, it's an invaluable tool for doing that. You're looking at the picture. I know the picture's not on there. I think I actually showed it for the Health Nugget this morning, but it's out there. It's a very small book, but a very powerful book because it allows you the opportunity to work one-on-one with someone who has this issue. And I think that's important. You know, a material or something like that, we were talking about the person who was struggling with smoking. You know, having material that someone can actually have that not only do they have by themselves, but that you can actually work with them to say, you know, how's this working for you? What can we do? This kind of thing. Now, so where we're at, so we've talked about a couple things. We've talked about, you know, sharing with people. What do you think, what here for your church? How do you feel like you could incorporate some of these things to help your community? Any ideas? I know I'm putting you on the spot now, but that's okay.
We can try a one-day Sunday and do something like exercise or something like that.
So she's mentioning something that I've seen happen in several churches, which is where they start like a walking club. And you say, all right, you know, advertise it. You know, we're going to be doing a walking club. We're going to be talking about health things. Or maybe, how about something like this? Do you guys have a physician in the church?
No.
Or no one around? Because a dinner with the doctor is a great thing. Or you can have, you know, there's what's the one that you did, the vegetarian supper club. These are some ideas. You see, here's where I'm going with this. If your doors close here today, and you're out of business, church is not next week, my question for you is this. Does your community know, and do they care? Have you affected your community in a positive way? You see, when I look at Christ's method, we see that Christ went to the people. Christ was about evangelism. That's what he's asked us to do. And if we're sitting here and just coming to church every week, it's a challenge because we're not reaching the people, and therefore we're not getting, guess what? We're not getting the spiritual fulfillment that we need. I'm going to share something with you. I just want you to ponder this thought. In the book Christ's Object Lessons, it tells us this. When the character of Christ is perfectly reproduced in his people, he can come and claim them as his own. Christ is waiting for you and I. Now that falls very in line with, guess what? The message of Revelation 14, the three angels' message. And the reason that is because guess what? If we're doing Christ, if we have his character, we're going to be sharing him. Because we're told, guess what? That everybody has to hear this message before Christ comes. Because otherwise, it wouldn't be fair to those that Christ is going to have this message out to the world before he comes. Now, having said that, I want to share something with you that a lot of people don't know, which is, to me, is very interesting. In the book Medical Ministry, chapter 2, page 24, it says this. I read this, and it like blew me away. Because I was like, what is the character of Christ? We know it's called holiness, right? There's no question it's called holiness. But my question is always, is there something more? Is there something that we're missing as a church? And this is what I read. And I was actually teaching the class, and it hit me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Medical Ministry, chapter 2, page 24 says, when we practice medical missionary work, that we are perfecting our characters, even as Christ's character was perfected when he was on this earth and when he was with his Father. When we practice medical missionary work, we're perfecting our characters. We think we're going out and helping somebody else. But the truth of the matter is, it's really to help us as well. You see. So, by sitting here and not going to the community, by not practicing this, we can't fully develop the character of Christ. And this is why I've said this time and time again, we need something that triggers us. And health is one of the most important things. A couple of weeks ago in the Sabbath school lesson, it was talking about, the things that we have when we leave behind. And one of the things I found very interesting there was, guess what? They talked about, like leaving money for the church, leaving money for your kids, yada, yada, yada. But guess what? Who here in this room who says, I know I'm dying next year, would rather have the $1 million or an extra year of life? Everybody goes for the health. The health trumps the money. That's the message we have. We have this message, and it's simple. It's so simple, it makes you stumble as you're trying to speak. And by the way, when you understand it, I hope you understand, appreciate, I'm getting told I gotta roll on. But I hope you understand that we are a team, and we are all in this room right now, as far as I know, guess what? We are the lay members of the church. We are the ones who are supposed to take up the extra work. I am a lay member like you, and I can tell you that it is invaluable to just learn these things so that we can not just keep them for ourselves, but to share them with others. Now, Karen's going to roll up now, and she's going to do a class on natural remedies. We'll take a minute or two, just get some fresh air. By the way, did anybody go for a walk after lunch today?
We did not.
You don't want to blame on that? Me. Because guess what? I went for a walk, but I didn't invite anybody. Remember, then that's the thing. I always think we should invite somebody, right? I didn't invite anybody. I should have invited somebody to go with me on my walk today. Anyway, I hope that you've learned something. If you have any questions or comments, you should have some paperwork there that you can, hopefully you was able to jot down some notes if you needed to. If you had somebody that you know of that's struggling in some of these areas. But if you have any questions or comments, we'll tackle some of those. And otherwise, we'll go and get ready for Karen's class, and we'll have a close with prayer, okay? Our kind and gracious and loving Heavenly Father, we are so thankful today for your many blessings. You, Heavenly Father, have given us here in this church the gift of life. And Heavenly Father, we're even looking forward to a better life and eternal life. And Heavenly Father, as we are on that journey, I pray that you will put it into our hearts, our souls, that we need to help those who are less fortunate, that they don't have that hope. Heavenly Father, even if we can't help them with their needs that are here on this earth, maybe we can help to lead them to a spiritual life and draw them in for a life eternal. Heavenly Father, we pray today that you will bless this church. Give them the strength and the courage to go out and be a part of their community, that they will take care of themselves, and that they will be able to move forward with power and be ready to serve their community. For we ask all this in the precious and the loving name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.